Hello and welcome back to the channel, and what I guess I'm going to have to call part 12 of my series, Living with a Tao Tao. Despite the fact that this scooter has been the subject of the majority of the comments on even my newest videos, it's been about 2 years since I've made an update on this project, so there's a chance you might not even remember what this series is all about. It all started back in 2020.
I purchased the most hated scooter on the internet and made it my daily means of transportation in order to find out if it really is unreliable or if it just has unreliable owners. In order to give the scooter a fighting chance, I performed all the required services outlined in the owner's manual. Throughout the experiment, I kept a comprehensive trip log, service notes, and health report in a Google spreadsheet that I've shared with you in this video's description.
So here we are, back in 2023 with the present day Tao Tao in its present day condition. As noted in my log, the last time I rode this bike was October of 2020. After that, I stopped riding it and it sat in my backyard for 7 or 8 months, in which time we opened this shop. And so it came here and now it lives in the shop and I have to push it in and out every day to make space for the actual work. And while I'm pushing it in and out, I dread the day that I resurrect this project because of how much I hate riding this bike. It looks bad, it rides bad, and it's very, very slow. So here's the plan for resurrecting my Tao Tao. In order to address the chronically unreliable and chronically underpowered engine, we're going to rebuild it with performance parts. Starting off with an 80cc big bore kit paired with a big valve head. And what's a big valve head if you don't have a big nasty camshaft? And of course, if we've got a big valve head with a big nasty cam, we're going to need to push more fuel through the engine. So we've got a larger intake and a much larger performance carburetor with accelerator pump. And if we've got more fuel and air flowing through it, we're going to need a more reliable ignition system. Now the ignition system left me stranded on the side of the road one day. So I've got a performance CDI with a better timing curve and the coil-on plug ignition I'm using on my race bike. And if we've got more fuel and air entering the engine, we're going to have more exhaust exiting the engine, so we're going to need to pair that with a performance exhaust pipe. Now, installing all of these performance parts on the engine will definitely make the bike accelerate faster, but the transmission is still going to limit the top speed of the scooter to somewhere around 45 miles an hour. To take this build and push it to the next level, we're going to need to install a super transmission kit, and we're going to change the final drive ratio in the rear end using these new gear sets from NCY, also available on scooter911.com. All right, so this is the 2,400 kilometer motor out of my Tao Tao ATM50. You'll note it still has the Amazon exhaust on it from when the exhaust literally fell off the bike, but the welds on the muffler have broken off. So, and other than that, it looks like it's in pretty decent shape. I am noticing some oil leaking around the valve cover, and you know, all the hoses and lines are beginning to fatigue and get very stiff. But we need to strip this top end off the motor so we can install our new performance parts. And along the way, we'll see if there's anything of note to comment on. Nice clean top end. The valves still feel like they're in decent spec. Of course, I was doing the regular maintenance, keeping the oil clean and doing all my valve adjustments on time. Check the burn on the spark plug. And the spark plug is looking pretty rich. So clearly when I rejetted the carburetor, I went a little bit too far to the rich side. And again, the exhaust didn't fit exactly right. It's top dead center. Get the cam chain tensioner out. Here's the rocker assembly. That really looks like it's in good shape. The camshaft is showing some decent signs of wear. Wow, yeah. Actually, both lobes have a pretty good amount of wear. And it's time to take the head off. Yeah, a lot of carbon on the head from that rich condition. I guess I would have found that on my next service, but good to know now. Need my tiny hammer. All right, the cylinder looks pretty good. Still has some good cross hatching. Aside from the carbon buildup, I would say that was in pretty good shape. Okay, cut that, would you, Serge?
So
Looks like the base gasket came off super clean, so there's really not that much cleanup to do on it. Just a little spot here. Man, this piston's so big it barely fits through the studs. These dowels keep the head centered and keep the head gasket centered, so nothing shifts around while you're installing all this stuff. This new piston is so much larger than the original piston, and it's also got a completely different profile. It's actually a little bit dished where the stock is a little domed, but I mean, it's so much bigger than the stock. The valves in the new head are far bigger than the original valves, and it looks like it's got a different pressed in valve seat. So hopefully it'll have a little bit more durability as well. Nice. You'll also notice the new head is missing that little port here that goes into the exhaust. What this is either called a pair system or secondary air injection, and basically there's a little bit of fresh air that gets puffed in through the exhaust port, and that helps combust some of the unburnt hydrocarbons as it's passing through the motor. You know, it doesn't really hurt performance to have the pair valve or the secondary air injection on your bike. It just limits the exhausts that are available to the bike. You know, this new pipe we have doesn't have any of those extra bend backs and all that stuff, so it'll be nice. It'll clean up the look of the motor too, to not have all that stuff in there. We're about ready for that camshaft. Now for this, we're going to rotate the motor till it's top dead center. There's a little mark here on the case, and you can match the T and the F stamped on the flywheel to that mark to find top dead. Should be about there. But we can also just take a peek at the piston and see where she's at top dead. Right about there, actually. Where we thought she was. New cam. Lay it in place. This little hole at the top is top dead center for that. Rocker box. Well, I can see that's going to be a problem. We're definitely going to have to get a different rocker box for that, because we're not going to have contact between our rockers and the valves without, I mean, that's a good centimeter in there. Just a little bit of oversight while we were ordering the parts, but yeah. And we're back with the correct rocker assembly. This is the Type 1. And these head bolts get torqued down to 10 foot-pounds. These side bolts get torqued to 8 foot-pounds. Cam chain tensioner. And this spring piece, this little spring, is actually what tensions the timing chain. You can hear it ratcheting in place. All right, now everything is lubricated and we've rolled the motor over by hand several times. And check the timing. The timing is still dead on. The cam comes to top dead center when the piston comes to top dead center. So now the last thing we got to do before we put this valve cover back on is adjust the valves, of course. So we'll send this to top dead center one more time. Typically I like to set my QMB valve lash to 2 thousandths on the intake, 3 thousandths on the exhaust. But because this is a brand new motor with brand new valves and a brand new head, I want to give it a little bit of extra clearance. So I'm going to set these both to 4 thousandths. That's 4 thousandths on the intake, 4 thousandths on the exhaust. Ooh, man, that thing is pretty loose. And we'll roll the motor over a couple times and check it again. Feels pretty good. Feels great. All right, valve cover in place. Never going back together. All right, so we've got the top end assembled now, which is pretty awesome. It's kind of a shame to cover it up with all these fan shrouds, but I know it looks awesome. So we've of course changed the displacement of the engine from 49 cc's. Now this is an 88 cc engine. So we're nearly doubling the displacement of this motor, and that means that it is going to draw double the amount of air. And that means that we need to increase the size of our carburetor. So this is a 24 millimeter carburetor by OKO, and this should be what we need to get those higher top speeds we're looking for. So, of course, this massive carburetor won't go on the stock intake, but the intake manifold for the QMB motors is the same as the 150 GY6 when it comes to like the bolt spacing and whatnot. So you can actually just use a GY6 150 intake. Oh man, it goes right home, just like it wants to. First, we need some intake studs. So we'll install some brand new studs. And the trick I like to use for tightening these studs down into the head is I like to use the double nut method. That's where you send one nut down the stud, then you send another one on top of it. You can then tighten the nuts against each other and then use a wrench to tighten the stud into the head. This also works for removing the studs, which is great. So that's nice and tight. So then you just loosen the nut, take them out. All right, now it's time for the intake gasket and the spacer. Our new intake manifold, the O-ring is already installed on it. All right, now we get to see if our giant 24mm carburetor will fit up here. So this is a 24mm carburetor from OKO. It is a CV style carburetor, so the main slide is operated by vacuum, and this has the additional accelerator pump. So be delivering quite a bit more fuel than the factory carburetor was. And it looks like we might have a clearance issue with this little vent port here. Maybe I'll open the carburetor up and see what's inside. Before I delete this little extra nipple here, I better know what it does. Our little tube here appears to be some sort of vent. It passes through the float bowl here. And what's great is these are just pressed in so we can remove them. And if it was something very important or the carburetor doesn't act right, I can always put it back or block that hole. So let me just take that out. Easy as that. We'll leave it open to atmosphere for now, and then if we have some crazy running issue, we'll try that first. All right, it looks like I'm gonna have a little bit of a clearance issue between cam chain tensioner cover and the throttle position sensor and some of the side of this carburetor, so I'm gonna remove that first. There we go. Seems to be all right. Now, I'm not going to be using this throttle position sensor for anything, but I can tell people that it's got one now. Of course, with this much larger carburetor, the factory airbox isn't going to work anymore, so we're going to replace it with this pod-style air filter. Nice. And now it's time to get into the transmission and final drive. Ultimately, we need to change this final drive ratio because without changing that final ratio, the top speed of the Tao Tao will still be about the same. We need to make sure we give it that extra leg to get up in maybe to the 50s or 60s. We'll see how far this thing goes. All right. There's my brand new Gates PowerLink belt from one of the last times it broke down on me. And the belt just absolutely shredded there. And in multiple places too. That was pretty cool. And the driven clutch. All of this has to make way for the new NCY Supertrans kit. This is what we're after here. This is the final drive assembly. Nothing to it. Let's open it up. Ooh, my fresh Bel-Ray gear saver.
So you're gonna start whacking on it?
Yeah, I'm gonna see what happens. I'm just gonna give it a couple whacks here. Here it comes. So this is the final drive assembly of the scooter. This small pinion gear is driven by the clutch, which is on the transmission side in the CVT. This small gear turns this intermediate gear, which makes contact with this gear, and this gear has the splines for the rear wheel. So the ratio will determine how many revolutions the clutch needs to make in order for the rear wheel to revolve one time. Now we're ready for reassembly. Now this kit from NCY comes with a new spur gear and a new pinion gear. and this replaces components in the transmission. But unfortunately, the pinion gear is press fit onto the original spur gear. So this is best done with a hydraulic press. I don't have a hydraulic press here in the shop, so I ended up pressing this off with the vise.
Mamma mia!
And then pressing it on was a challenge. I ended up throwing the pinion gear into the freezer to get it nice and cold and shrunk, and then I heated the spur gear with a torch, and then just very carefully massaged it back on there with pressure and an aluminum drift. It is slightly discolored, but there's no way I got this thing hot enough to ruin the temper of the gear. These final drive ratios are available in 3 different sizes. There's an 18 to 46, a 17 to 41, and a 16 to 42. And I'm just going to start off with the 18 to 46 because it's in the middle of the road, and I have direction. I can go either way. If this is too tall of a gear and the bike doesn't have enough acceleration, I can change the ratio, or if I think the bike can handle it and I want more, I could actually switch again to the taller ratio. So let's throw it in. Oh, so smooth.
Performance CDI. Performance exhaust.
All right, I guess this is it, the moment we've been waiting for. I've got the engine installed back in the chassis. It's got the 88cc kit, the high compression piston, the big cam. I've got my coil-on plug ignition wired in, as well as my no rev limit advanced CDI. And then of course that nasty Prima exhaust. So I guess we're ready to light it up and see if we have something here. All right, well, I'd call that a success. I guess I'll heat cycle the motor a couple more times, just get everything broken in, and then maybe we'll take it for a road test. All right, well, we seem to keep going 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I was getting ready to take this thing out on the street. I opened the fuel tank to drain the old fuel out of it, thinking I would want fresh fuel for my new build. And I found my fuel tank is totally rusted and destroyed. So luckily I have my handy Tao Tao log here, so I can tell you when the last time I put gas in this bike was. October 12th, 2020. I put a gallon of 87 octane in there. So 4 years of sitting, it is destroyed. Let me pull this fuel sender out so you can see how bad that is. The smell is just terrible. There we go. And the amount of rust on there, oh look, it's stuck. The float won't even move. So this fuel gauge would have no longer worked. You can see the little potentiometer there is stuck in its position. But there is I guess a positive side to Chinese scooters, and that is there are lots of parts available and they're relatively cheap. So I've got a new fuel tank and a new fuel level sender unit. So let me put these back together and hopefully we'll take it for a ride. All right, and just like that, my little baked Tao is back together and ready for a road test. I did add a little bit of fuel from our gas can to the tank, and I installed a new battery. Now, instead of going back with another 4 LBS battery, I installed a 7 ABS, which is a larger battery. It's got more power to crank the larger engine with higher compression. And I guess I'm ready to ride this thing for the first time since October of 2020. So I'll be updating my mileage on the Tao Tao log. And I guess I'll just take it around the block a couple times, see what it's like, and then head to a fuel station. Come along with me, why don't you? All right, so here we go. A little hard to start. Let it warm up a little bit. All right, let's go. All right. Not too bad. Oh my gosh. That is significant how much more power it has. Holy cow. I'm getting to 35 quick and I'm only using about a quarter throttle. Oh my God, yeah. Wow, the pickup is great. Man, that was an indicated 45, which never would have happened on the stock motor.
Tao Tao.